very first inkling of?
Well, the very first inkling was when we'd always been looking at it. We had we had the first grape picker in this area, 1968, made by Chisholm Ryder.
Okay.
And we traveled really several places on the East Coast, primarily New Jersey, and then also down to South Carolina, harvesting grapes, much like the combines in the West.
Okay.
And during that time, we picked grapes for wineries in New Jersey. And that prompted us to think about getting into the wine business as a grape grower. And we were always interested. And we made friends with people who had wineries in Ontario, Canada, and also who had wineries in New York, specifically Great Western / Taylor, and also the wineries of New Jersey. And in doing that, it just kind of built. And we got interested in doing it. We talked to people who made the equipment that you operated, and we just were thinking about it, my father and I. And then when Taylor Wine Company decided they weren't going to process anywhere near as many grapes as they were in the past, that caused us to say, okay, let's see if we can't put something together in the way of a farm winery law that would promote.
So now, so you knew the structure of the legislation at that point wasn't going to allow what you needed to do. So you needed to switch that up.
Well, in talking to the winery friends that we had in New York, the small winery friends, we determined that that was a serious interference, roadblock
right.
to marketing to the consumer, the simple fact that we couldn't market 100% to the consumer.
Right. Because you were severely limited at that point.
At 5%,
right.
is a severe limitation. Maximum amount to the consumer direct from the winery. So in an attempt...
can I ask you what
Sure.
the point of that was? What was the purpose?
Well, I think it was an attempt on the part of the State Liquor Authority to maintain the so-called three-tier system.
Right.
Where they had control. They were the licensees or licensors.
Sure.
I don't know how you say it.
Right.
They were the people who made the license or provided the license for the retailers and for the distributors, for the taxation, so they knew they had a good hold on what was going on,
right,
rather than allowing a winery to sell direct to the consumer and, in quotes, potentially losing control.
Gotcha.
That was their concern, I'm sure.
And at one point, you were part of a small group then, during this time period, and said, look, this has got to change. This industry is going to grow. We're even going to have a chance. This is our first big battle.
Well, basically, the four of us said, if the wine grape industry in New York State is going to survive, it's going to have some changes. And I see a future, or we saw a future, as a small winery, a petit chateau industry, if you will, that would have access to the wine grapes that were already being produced, but that the primary processor had no interest in. And so that's why we went to our legislators, Governor Carey, and I think it was Pat Corsi's niece, who worked for the governor, very interested in supporting the industry, and helped us find our way to the legislation, or through the legislative process, to get the law written so that it would allow for 100% sales direct to the consumer. It would allow for sales to distributors. We became our own distributor through the legislation.
Sure.
And without having to buy a separate license, as commercial wineries had to. And so all these, and it actually reduced the cost of becoming a winery. So all these things encouraged wineries. We became the first grape grower to form a winery under the new law. And we became BW New York 16 as far as the feds were concerned. Everybody else was gigantic, except for, I think, 3 wineries. And then the industry has grown. The Finger Lakes started growing in '78, and other wineries formed around us here in the late '70s and early '80s.
But because of your effort, that allowed the Finger Lakes to happen.
Well, the Finger Lakes collectively, the New York State industry collectively has over 400 wineries. The Finger Lakes are well over 250. just in the Finger Lakes alone. And now there's wineries in the Thousand Islands region. There's wineries scattered throughout New York, and it's all because of this legislation. Yes.
Now, do people know? I always wonder, like when you're in an industry, like my industry happened, like in the way that I do this through a certain amount of effort on certain people's parts, because you have to open up this path. And I wonder sometimes if people actually that are, is this common knowledge in your industry that people understand like what you guys built for them? Because they wouldn't have a business or an industry without your early effort on this. Because I didn't know any of this.
Well, it's 1976. A lot of these folks weren't born then.
Well, no, but did they know the history that you guys were this group of guys going up against? It's a big deal especially then too. I think now we're more proactive. As a society, where back then things were my father's generation, my grandfather's generation, things were the way they were, and you accepted that. And you didn't really rally too much against that. But you guys were like, look, this has to change if we're going to have this industry here. So you made that change, and trying to get legislation passed is a nightmare.
Well, it can be.
It's difficult. Did you guys have a lot of pushback, or because the industry is at that point?
We got a lot of support from the Finger Lakes as they saw what was going on, because many of them received concerns from their grape growers.
Right.
We also got a lot of support from our local legislators, who then rallied their supporters, their peers who had common interests. Did we get a lot of support out of the downstate area, meaning New York City? No, but it wasn't an issue. They says, oh, okay, sure, whatever. I mean, to them, upstate New York, anything past, what is it, White Plains?
Everybody says this, right?
is another world.
Yeah, they're just like, whatever you guys do, I don't care.
Yeah, which is fine. And I've been through New York City a lot of times. I used to live in New Jersey, and we used to go in there all the time. The city's a different world too.
It is.
I mean, the city is just awesome.
Yeah. And it is. It's its own entity among everything, among cities, among this country, among the East Coast.
It's its own world.
Yeah, it really is. It's got its own
really
everything. So now you guys get this passed. You make this huge effort. You get this passed. Now we've got an open play field.
Somewhat. Open playing field is a very large statement. It's like forever. It lasts a long time.
Right.
An open playing field, yes, a much relaxed playing field, I should say, compared to where we've been.
And you could now say, look, we can now develop our business.
Well, yeah.
So now, does this tie in? So you get this passed. This is with Johnson too, right? Fred is involved in this?
Fred went from being a commercial winery to a farm winery, which allowed him a lot more flexibility.
Now, so for people who don't understand, what's the difference between a commercial and a farm winery?
Well, a farm winery operates under a little different requirements. We have to use 100% New York State fruit. Okay. We are limited in our production now to 150,000 gallons. It used to be 50 initially.
Wow, that's a significant jump.
That's a significant difference. 50,000 gallons of wine is still a lot if you have to sit down and drink it by yourself. Take a couple days. But it allowed us an opportunity to reach the consumer. It gave us the right to have a retail outlet, one at the winery and two exterior or removed from the winery. And it was the early 80s rather, when my wife and I set up a retail store in the Seneca Mall, which is a mall that's...
I live not even 2 miles from there. I grew up in West Seneca. Yeah. So you guys were in there.
We were in the Seneca Mall in an old Caravel ice cream location.
Exactly. So you were on the corner next to the fireplace.
There you go.
Yeah, I grew up there, man. I was on that fireplace every weekend.
Well, and so you must have seen it during the holiday season.
I'm sure I did.
It never registered.
Yeah, I was a kid, so
sure.
Yeah.
But we operated a store there, very successful, and from that store, it created enough interest to where we started getting a few stores in the Buffalo market, and it just slowly built. We picked up a distributor early in '79. We had a distributor, and we worked with them through '79 and '80, and then we had another wine distributor during the early '80s. And then they've all closed, and so we went back to having our own salespeople. They were German immigrants. They came in from Germany. He worked at the Brooks Locomotive Works in Dunkirk. They've now torn down the building, but his job was to install steam heat in the Pullman cars. That's what he did.
Wow.
He's
and then he earned enough money to buy this farm, 50 acres.
Wow.
And away it went. These are empty tanks awaiting this year's harvest.
Now, layman's question, so will you have overage? And what would you do with that overage? Do you plan for just enough? Like
how do you, our tanks?
Yeah, how do you work?
We fill our tanks. We process about 60,000 gallons every year.
Okay. Who was here, like at the onset of this business? Was it like a literal mom and pop?
No, it was Christy and myself.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was the two of us, and then my mother and my stepfather. Unfortunately, my father passed in '76.
Okay.
But my stepfather was a very important part of it, right up until he passed, as was my mother, a very important part of it. I mean, the four of us really put the place together. I made the wine, and Christy ran the office, and we did hire one or two people at that time to help. And they're still part of our lives. One of the young ladies who used to work here when she was in high school now comes to our events, and she's a good friend.
Right.
Come on in, I'm going to shut the door.
Wow.
And not all the tanks in here are full.
Okay.
But most of them are at least half full. But the tanks in the back there,
right,
those are the original tanks we started with.
Oh, you're kidding.
And they were milk trucks. They used to go on the road, milk trucks. Not this.
No. So is that why they have that patina on them?
That's why it's oval.
Right.
That's the outside of a milk truck.
Oh, that is awesome.
And in between that and the actual outside of the tank,
right,
was a cork insulating and an outer skin of stainless.
So, which one was your very first one? Is it here still?
No, we built all of these tanks, the ones in the back there.
Okay.
We made them all. And the ones that are lumpy or look tired, those are the ones we made.
Wow. So, did you make them out of necessity? Was it necessity the mother of invention here, or was it cost effective?
$4 a gallon, 50 cents a gallon.
Awesome. Yeah, why not, right?
I mean, that tank cost me a few $100s. I put legs on it, moved the man weight to the top,
right,
and all of a sudden, bada bing, bada boom.
So,
I got a wine tank.
So, was that common back then?
No.
So there you go. So it's another kind of an innovation to say, hey, why are we going to go buy this when we can make it? And
how can we afford to have stainless steel tanks when we can't afford to have stainless steel tanks?
Right. Super smart.
To show you how old this tank is.
Okay.
See those holes?
Uh-huh.
Those were baffles. You can't have baffles in a milk tank anymore.
But back then
you could. This thing's
holy cow.
3/16 stainless.
Super solid.
Didn't have a foggy clue as where I was headed. I just knew that the grape business was struggling, and this looked like it might be better.
Yeah.
I got a lot of input from a gentleman, Ed Haynes, who's now passed. He used to be a winemaker over at Widmer's, and Ed used to come in and consult. And he guided me in many ways. And that's where I went to California, I studied at Davis, winemaking. And my father, through his knowledge and through his work prior to retiring, had traveled all over the South in California, working with table grapes, helping them. The Thompson Seedless used to be a little round green berry, and when applied with gibberellic acid, it became a thing as long as your pinky. I mean, it would be inch and a quarter long. And that's why they look so nice and are edible today. But he worked with other crops too, but that was one of the primary things. But he knew a lot of people. And like Bob Poole came from the California industry to New York and did tremendous work here, and Nelson Chawless. And all these people helped influence me and encourage me to get into the wine business. This is my mother's home farm. My mother was born in the house that sits at the top of the hill here, where my son now lives.
That's a whole other level of...
Oh, it just entwines. That's where my mother was born, brought up. These are vineyards that my grandfather planted back in the late 1800s.
Are you kidding?
So it goes way, way back. So there was nothing to, in quotes, buy. We were operating 250 acres of grapes in the early 70s, as well as having our own picker and traveling all over the East Coast.
So right, and that's how you were saying it, kind of aggregated over.
And then this is the original facility. It's morphed over the years tremendously, but it's still the original piece of concrete.
What's different about these tanks in this room?
Well, those have the capacity to be refrigerated.
Okay.
They're not hooked up currently, but we have the ability to run glycol through those to chill the product that's in them on the farm milk storage tanks. We brought those from a friend of mine who was in Rwanda, and we welded two of them together. We got two tanks of the same size, welded two of them together, and like that.
And so, but these are older. I mean, these have been with you for a long time, right? Since you started.
Inception.
Wow. So if we jump ahead, you're in your car, you and your wife are working your tail off, legislation's passed, you've got your business running, and you see it ahead, but you don't really know what the future holds, right? So what was your first moment where you're like, we're on to something here? We've got like a great business here.
I'm not sure there's ever been a we're on to something moment. I take that back. There is. Example.
Well, there's always those eureka, you're like, okay, the level of like, you're like.
I understand.
Yeah.
There were little eurekas along the way
Right.
forever, okay? Don't misunderstand. For instance, in 1978, my wife and another woman who worked here went to New York State Fair because the Hugh Carey's government had encouraged the State Fair to have New York State wines there. And we were there with Gold Seal and Widmer's and Great Western and Taylor and Merritt. All stood in this probably 50 by 50 fenced-in enclosure with two armed uniformed state troopers at the gate. One entrance in, one entrance out. And they stood there all day with their arms folded, looking very unhappy. But
sure.
Nice guys, but just what in the world am I doing standing here?
Yeah, why?
But anyway, and we offered samples of wine and were able to sell wine by the glass. We had a temporary wine and beer permit. And we were able to sell wine by the glass for 75 cents.
Wow.
For a 5-ounce glass of wine.
Right.
And then my wife came up with the idea of making a wine cooler because wine coolers were popular in the early 70s. And so we would mix our sangria with 7-Up and put ice in it and offer it as a wine cooler. And that became extremely popular.
Yeah, that sounds.
And so, like I said, in 78, we were actually going along, and then State Fair developed from this enclosure. They allowed us to actually go into the agricultural building to have our own display, and there was another probably dozen different wineries there. Other wineries had begun to form. And we were, again, selling direct to the consumer, bottles this time, as well as samples, but not glasses, bottles and samples. And that went on for several years. We went from the ag building over to a big tent by the Christmas trees. Then we went to the big tent out next to what at that time was Miller Court.
Right.
And so it was exclusively direct to the consumer right there.
Right.
And, my wife passed in 96, and my son Jason has taken over the State Fair. In fact, he started in 90 with his mom working down there, and he spent 29 years at the State Fair.
Wow.
This year was his 29th year.
Oh my gosh.
And we've been, I would bet we're one of the longest running concessionaires at the State Fair. We started in 78, so we're 42 years.
That's awesome, though, because now you're an expectation when you go there.
Sometimes.
Right.
There was a wall about where you see that post. That was our sales room.
So this was like the main hub.
Yeah, it was the hub. Main hub.
It was the only.
The only hub. There was a set of stairs that went upstairs to the office. Right here was a gutter.
Okay.
That ran all the way to the end, just about to the end, and continues on through. And right about here was where we wash bottles and put them on a rack to dry. Then this would have been where our volley line was. It was a siphon filler, float valve in the back.
Okay.
You have in the toilet tank.
Same premise, right?
And so you take the bottles off and put them on two at a time.
Okay.
And then you step over here, and the corker was right here. And we're going to set up a museum someday because we still have it.
I was just going to say, when I was looking at those tanks in there, what an awesome museum piece.
And you put them in the corker, ka-chink, because that's how it worked. You had to activate it by pushing forward on the bottle and drive the cork in. Set it down, do this one, set it down, and somebody else would take a pair of capsules and slip them over the top. And then somebody else would take the bottle, and in the morning we would pre-sort the labels front and back.
Wow.
And so we had them in a nice stack, and we put them in the labeler. Initially we had a thing called a pot devil. My wife called it a pot devil. But it was a label, it was a glue applicator.
Okay.
And a little tin plate like this, a brass drum rolling with glue on it.
Right.
And you strut it in and it would zip, and you had to catch it. And then we had a little rack over here, and you put the label on, and you turn the bottle, and you put the next one through, put the label on. That's where we started.
Right.
And then from Italian and French, we got an old labeler, where we collated the labels.
Yep.
And then we put that stack in there, and then that was a foot operated. Very modern.
Sure.
Bottle in place.
Step it on, and then...
Turn 90 degrees, it was 180. So we had 3 people, 4 actions.
I absolutely love that. When you really think about, this is where you...
Yeah.
This is everything. This is like your pivot point for the world here. And all that love, all that curation, all that stewardship, all of this growth, everything that you've been through as a business and as a person and your family, it's all here. So that makes a huge difference, I feel.
No, you're right.
The emotion that you're going to get. It's like visiting somebody's house. When you're in a house that's full of love and laughter and joy versus a house that's full of discourse and, dysfunction. You have such a beautiful environment here.
Well, thank you.
So, and that's what it's about, is having that experience.
Well, and Jason and I have been very lucky in having very good staff around us. I mean, if it wasn't for the folks that help us, and there's 20-some year-round that work here, it would be just impossible to maintain.
Sure.
But the staff is what makes it all work.
It means everything.
Yeah.
It does.
Well, a lot of the folks that work here are treated as if it was their own.
Right.
I mean, literally treated as if it was their own. And they think of it from that standpoint. And so if they see something that they don't like, they're more than happy to say, hey, do you really think this is the way it should be? Don't you think it should be? Oh, yeah, thank you.
And you
appreciate you pointing that out.
My parents were the same way, and they raised me the same way, because you have that dialogue with them.
Yeah.
Don't be scared to tell me something. Let me know, right? Because you don't know, you can't see everything at all times. So they'll come to you, and that's how you get, I think, a really beautiful, curated business, when everybody takes ownership,
You're absolutely right. From the post out there was a concrete pad. Mm-hmm. My stepfather built a building over it, which still supports everything that goes on upstairs. That's where the part of the office is. That's where Lisa's office is.
Okay.
Upstairs. But that was concrete pad. That's where we made the tanks. And then they came through here. And then there was a door here that was made out of 2 pieces of 4x8 plywood. You pick them up and we move them out of the way. And then move the tanks inside.
Right.
And then we put
Hey, look at this! You got a text message!
There we go. That's my roots again. Anyway, we would go in, and then we would hook a double hoist. We had a falls, rope falls.
Okay.
And then you put that around the neck and
Hoist it up and...
stand it up, and then it goes from being here to here to here. Then it goes...
Because it's got to wait till it finds its equilibrium, right?
You should see people run when you do that.
I could only imagine. You never had any issues, right, with that?
Well, we've got an old saying that I stole from the folks in New England. It said, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do it without.
That's what this is about, though. It's about you made do, and you built this business. It was all hard, grassroots DIY labor. You had to figure it out as you went. And
Sure, we can do that.
the labor, yeah, why not? Right? Keep moving, and then
I
eventually,
like that. You act like you know what you're doing. Nice.
right?
Nice shot.
It's true though, right? You know, you start a
Oh,
business.
more true than you admit.
Yeah.
I mean, when I walked into the governor's office, I tried to act like what I was doing, like I knew what I was doing.
Right.
And it's been a good industry. I mean, Walt Taylor and I went to see the governor one day, and he brought his 15, 16-year-old son. And we were having a very sincere, serious conversation with the governor, going back to three of us. And all of a sudden, you hear this big snore. And his son, head flopped over the back of the chair, was sound asleep. So it takes a little relief, you know?
Yeah.
Something to put things back in perspective.
Exactly.
Maybe we're not that important.
No, at the end of the day, you're just doing what you do. And you have fun, and you put a lot of love and care into it, you know?
It worked.